Welcome back, Dragon Ballers, to Get the Mic, the only show where your host on the left, Owl,
And your host on the right, Brock.
dissect fiction for its mythological significance. In this episode, we're talking about Dragon Ball, as usual, and in particular, we're on episode 62, which is The Sacred Water.
The Sacred Water.
Now, just that name we have established the legend of the Sacred Water in the past few episodes, climbing the tower. We'll get to the Sacred Water, all that stuff. And just to mention briefly, actually, I think we'll probably get into it with the clips, so I'll just save it for that. Anything housekeeping-wise, administratively-wise that we need to get into?
I don't think so.
Did we want to stream sometime?
Generally, yeah.
Hmm.
We do want to stream sometime.
Just hard to do with some scheduling issues. Anyways, let's go ahead and get into it then. So, the first thing we have this recap. So previously, Goku arrived at the top of Korin's tower and met Korin, the hermit cat. We spoke briefly about him last episode. Korin told him that he could have the sacred water, but it was known as the super spirit water if he can get to it. Korin proceeded to block him and dangle the water from his staff, taunting Goku and telling him that he isn't reading his opponent. That night, Korin told him that 300 years ago, Roshi came to take the water from him, and it only took him 3 years to do so.
3 years.
So that all happened in the last episode. It's kind of a recap of where we're at. I do want to mention, too, briefly, because it wasn't in this recap here, that the impetus for Goku being able to ascend the tower in the first place was the channeling of the ancestral father in the form of his 4-star ball to give him the inspiration to use his power of being to defeat undeath and revive Bora.
Right. When he gazes into the 4-star ball at the base of the tower, it even shows on the ball. The ball looks like a yin and yang, right? There's a shadow on the bottom of the ball. And it doesn't balance out perfectly into a yin and yang, but I think it's intentional, especially with this idea of him needing to put balance back to things, right?
Right, and so he climbs this tower and finds this master who says that his own master, it took him 3 years to get it. Now, this is important because it shows the reverence Goku has towards Roshi, right, is not unearned. So hearing this might discourage someone of lesser spirit, let's say.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how we end the last episode, with the lightning flashing around him because he's being enlightened to the scope of what he has taken on by coming up here, right? It's been very straightforward up until this point because Goku just thinks all he needs to do is try hard enough and go directly at the water and he can just get it, just through sheer effort, right?
Right, and interestingly enough, it's more than that because it is almost the thing that Goku has kind of abandoned, which is a game. He first needs to understand the game that he's playing in order to conquer it.
Mm-hmm. And that's what he's sort of being enlightened to, and he gets enlightened more and more to that throughout this episode. But this is the first inkling and why his first day was essentially so unsuccessful, because he, we had said that he didn't pay much reverence to Korin when he got here, but he does pay that reverence to Roshi. And so his eyes are wide open as he's being sort of enlightened as to what it is he's trying to do here, right? That he's trying to surpass Roshi in this moment.
Right, and it's also to say that the necessity for Goku to conquer death is such that it is a greater calling than Master Roshi's attempt to become the spiritual father, because Roshi's attempt at it 300 years ago, right, was on his journey to become that paragon that he is at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Goku is not doing it so that he can get stronger or anything like that, right?
He's doing it out of a certain necessity and responsibility.
And that's what I'm saying, in essence, because And a lot of people will say that Goku's spirit is that which just challenges to get stronger and stronger, right? But here is not the case. Here, Goku is doing this so that he has an ultimate goal that's more sublime in its form than simply the desire to be strong so that one can be strong.
Right, that's been his main motivating factor, aside from which we saw at the beginning of this season, this little arc. Um, I say this little arc like the Red Ribbon Army Saga is a little arc, but up until the point that he was going to try to regain the 4-star ball, that was basically his main motivating factor. Was he learned that there were new things out in the world that he didn't know about, and there were stronger people out in the world, and that was it. He just wanted to confront that chaos, right?
Which is a holy spirit to inhabit, but ultimately to achieve greater things than simply, um, let's say, integrating oneself to actually make a change outwardly. The aim has to be changed, and so here Goku has changed his aim based on the let's say the sacrifice of Bora and the then assumption of responsibility that he gains by accepting the judgment of the spirit of the father and the ancestral spirit, which compels him to then use his wish to resurrect Bora.
Right, and it's especially poignant, right, that this is how he does it, is that he ascends to find that spiritual father, master type figure and figure out what he's
Yeah,
supposed to do in relation to
it
it.
it tilts his gaze upwards. And so we go ahead and move on. So shocked at the news that it took his master 3 years to obtain the water, Goku states that he only has a day or two to get it, thinking of Tao and Upa, right? And we've already mentioned earlier in last episode Tao's mockery and condescension has been kind of driving Goku's spirit in this point, and it is to say that that spirit of anti-being, right, can call forth the spirit which rises against it, and that's pretty much what Tao has evoked by doing what he's done to Goku. And then Upa, of course,
Right, and that's why Korin then does it immediately when he reads Goku's intentions.
right? It's the same kind of test, right?
Right, he's stomping his foot and he's sticking his tongue out and he's like, "Come on, come on," because in that sense, he's saying, "Okay, can you get that?" Right?
Hmm.
If that's your aim, can you get it?
Can you rise to that challenge, right?
Hmm.
So Korin tells him that he needs that he'll need to get the water and turns his head up downstairs. Wait,
That he'll
sorry.
need to get the water and turns to head downstairs to take a 3-day cat
Goodness.
nap.
Goodness. What a strange way to write it with no commas. Sorry. Goku rushes after him, attempting to confuse him with an after image technique. Korin responds in kind and tricks Goku with his own after image technique, causing Goku to crash into the floor. As Goku rushes after him, again he realizes that he's become completely out of breath. So Korin simply tells him he needs to get the water and turns to head downstairs to take a 3-day cat nap. So there, of course, we see instantly Korin understands the limits of Goku's time and says that, like, all right, well, I'm not going to be available for that time. I'm going to go sleep for 3 days so that you can't do this thing.
Right, it's he understands that the aim that Goku has, which is that he wants to rush it, is not going to get it for him at all. Right, and so he sort of shows him that that attitude of "I need it right now," um, it's not gonna work. In fact, it's so not gonna work,
What
I
an
might as well go to
impatient
sleep.
fellow. Yeah.
Yeah, and he says that, "What an impatient fellow."
And it is to say that Corin's idea here that it's unworthy, let's say, to be impatient in this way. It kind of evokes that desperation out of Goku though, because then he uses the after image, right? He's pulling out like all the stops, every technique that he knows. And I think it is kind of to rile that spirit, like what we were talking about a couple episodes ago with Master Yoda and Luke, right, is that he riles his spirit whenever he's talking to Obi-Wan about him and about how he's too reckless and things, right? And calling out his flaws, that ancestral spirit that can identify the flaws in the hero and the individual, right? That calls forth from the hero specifically um the best part of them, which is what Goku's doing here, which is that determination we see. And even though he's not doing the right things to get the water, right? He is attempting with what the tools he knows to do it.
Right. I also like here when he uses the after image technique, right? There's an interplay uh between him and Korin, right? Goku pulls out all the stops. He makes as many images of himself as he possibly can, it seems. And then Korin tricks him by making one. And then Goku crashes into the floor trying to because he doesn't expect that Korin would be able to do it, right?
And Korra knows that, of course, right?
But I like that because the way that Goku is out of breath here is that he's wasted his movements, right? He has dissociated himself in a sense. He's made this complicated maneuver to try to get around um Korin's mode of being, and Korin's mode of being says, "I only need one after image whenever you're expending all of your energy on 20 of them," right?
Right. And let's say like energy being that actual physical manifestation that one can bring about in the world, right? It's to say that the wasting of that potential is not a good thing.
Right, and specifically, we see that he's out of breath from doing it.
Hmm.
He's wasting his breath on this technique.
Yes. And breath is going to be very important as we get
Mhm.
further, right? Because breath is the
It's Numa,
yeah,
spirit.
it is the way one is exactly. So let's go ahead and continue
So
here.
yeah, Goku rushes after him and he realizes he's completely out of breath, right? And Korin just goes downstairs.
As he does so, Goku rushes after Goron again, and he realizes he hasn't eaten since the day before and promptly passes out. Right. So this is that idea that the spirit can endure exhaustion past the limits of the physical manifestation of the body. And
Mhm.
so here Goku's pushed past his physical manifestation, not even realizing that he's so hungry that he passes out. Upon hearing this, Gordon realizes that he hasn't eaten in 5 years, so he heads over to cook a fish. Now, this is very Buddhist in its idea of rejecting the physical needs and physical desires of life, right?
Mhm.
To abandon those wants, and the lack of one is what leads to that nirvana that's in the Buddhist doctrine. And here we have Korin, who is in a state of that being, right? And he, unlike Master Roshi, doesn't seem to have wants. He pays proper reverence. He does what he's supposed to. It's not like Master Roshi where he's watching TV and staring at the women, right?
Right, he has to be reminded that he's hungry
Yes.
rather than passing out, let's say, from exhaustion from hunger.
Hmm. And so it's a very Buddhist concept to have Korin at the top of this tower that has no wants and no desires and has to be reminded of his physical needs.
Mhm.
So when it's finished, he calls out to Goku, telling him the food is ready. To Goku's dismay, Korin eats the fish himself and tosses Goku a single bean. Goku complains that he needs much more food than this, and Korin tells him that it's a hermit bean called a Senzu bean, which can keep him full for 10 days. Goku is doubtful, but finds himself satiated upon eating it. Korin then tells him that he is short of breath because of their elevation, telling him that he is wasting his breath on unnecessary movement. So let's back up to the bean,
Mhm.
the sensu bean, the hermit bean.
The hermit bean, yeah.
I'm curious. Did you look up what sensu means?
So the sin in
Yeah,
Senzu is
pretty good.
short for sinin, right? Which
Yeah.
is it's basically a term for a hermit who would leave society to elevate themselves and become immortal, essentially. And so we've got sort of the immortal elevated cat spirit here. And he's a sinin, right? So it and also it's like historically Sinin were believed to be capable of flying through the air and riding clouds, right? And well, where did Roshi get his cloud, right? So
We don't know yet, but
so
go ahead.
in the etymology of the name anyway, that's what Senzu is a reference to. It's a reference um to that hermetic mode of being, right?
And it is that hermetic mode of being that pays reverence towards the orderly spirit that is represented in the logos that allows them to then nourish Goku here. And it's the same thing. It's why it nourishes all of our heroes later on in this show, is because it is an instantiation of that um, proper reverence paid towards the ancestral spirit and towards the ancestral way that allows them to continue with their vigor, let's say, in a spiritual sense.
Right. It is there's two aspects to the Senzu bean that I really like about this. The first one is think of it like this. When Goku gets the bean, he says, "I need much more food than this." And Korn says, "No, you don't." And Goku says, "Okay, well." He goes ahead and eats it, and then he's surprised to find that he is full, right? That he is satiated by the bean. I kind of think of it like this, right? If you were to go on a journey to meet a hermit and you're starving and you're out living on far less means than you normally would be, and you finally got to him and you were like, "Please, I'm starving. Give me something so that I can be nourished and I can take your teachings in." He gives you a single bean, and that's enough for you, right? Living on the minimum that you possibly can, and yet finding that you can live on far less excess than you would think, right? And so it is symbolic of that, right? Where Goku, he's wasting his breath on unnecessary movements, right? And whenever he sees the fish, he's like, "Oh, I want the fish, I want the fish." And Goku says, "I need more than this." And what Korin's trying to teach him is that no, he doesn't, right? He does not need more than this bean.
Well, and that's to say he doesn't need more, because if he was to act in the way that he should act, he wouldn't expend as much energy as he does, right?
Right.
And it's kind of and it is that hermetic tradition that spawns this idea of conservation of energy, right?
Hmm.
Which is kind of a scientific idea that was discovered before science existed
Right.
in that sense. And so the conservation of energy here is explained there through the sensu beans, and that knowledge and wisdom that's passed on is what then nourishes and reinvigorates the heroic spirit.
Right. And I need to point out, since you had mentioned the pre-scientific way of looking at this, the alchemical meaning of the Senzu bean, because this is a real thing. It's actually in Taoist alchemy, you have two types of alchemy. You have internal and external alchemy. So the process of purifying or refining yourself, your interior, is considered to be an internal alchemical process in Taoist alchemy. So they called that alchemy, right? Like you had a negative and positive energy inside of you, a yin and yang inside of you that you're trying to balance, right? Then there was another thing called external alchemy, where they would gather things like mushrooms and metal, like gold and mercury. They would combine those in, and make a pill out of it. And the idea was that a teacher could give that pill to their student. When they imbibed it, it would induce the internal alchemy for them, right? And then it would balance their yin and yang. And because of doing that, they would become true, or they would become healed, or they would become satiated, or they wouldn't feel like they needed things that they thought that they needed.
Well, I want to bring up a another example from fiction which is very similar to this, which we have brought up previously in the same little arc. And that is the Lord of the Rings. So in the Lord of the Rings, Frodo and Sam, they eat the lambus bread from the elves, right?
Right.
Which is made with special preparations laid down over generations from the elves that have that reverence and knowledge of the elder days of the beginning, whenever knowledge was less condensed. And so they make this lambus bread, and it's able to actually nourish the heroes through, even in the land of shadow, even in Mordor, they're able to eat the lambus bread.
Right.
And it's kind of that same idea. And elves, too, elves are an instantiation of what we're talking about, at least in Tolkien's world, because
Mhm.
they exist in a perpetual sense
Well, they're
with nature. They don't take
immortal in that sense, right?
exactly. They haven't left the garden. They've actually harmonized with Eden and they just live in Eden. And that's why they can live forever. And that's why they can talk to trees, right? And
Hmm.
that's why they don't take more than they need. That's why they don't burn trees to make industry. And that's also why they have the ability to make elven lambus bread, which is
Right.
basically the same thing as a sensu bean.
Well, I like it too because this is
Bean.
such an old idea. It goes back to Zoroastrian and Hindu Vedic texts. So I'd mentioned whenever we talked before about Durga, um, a text from the Rig Veda. And so in the Rig Veda, they talk about soma, which is either a pill or a drink. But let's say pill for the sake of this conversation.
Skooma.
And the soma is like the nectar of the gods. You know, it's like ambrosia. It's like all those different versions of it. But this text says, quote, "We have drunk soma and become immortal." Right? "We have attained the light that the gods discovered. Now what malice may do harm to us?" I really like the way that they put that because this grappling with what malice could be done to you is what Goku is doing here, right?
And so, I mean, not to get, he hasn't had the water yet, but that's basically what
No.
he's going to learn.
Right, but this is the pill is symbolic, or the bean or the seed, right? Because you can think of
Mm.
the Senzu bean as a seed, right? And you could say in Western alchemy you have seeds of gold. It's a seed of potential. This idea of the seed being cultivation or refinement, right? So it is that seed. It is that it's the thing that makes it possible. So the seed is planted in Goku here, right? So that he may cultivate or refine himself. So it's great because they actually use it appropriately as you would, let's say that it was this thing. That when he takes it, he no longer is distracted by his need for food, right? Because that's what's really going on here. Because Goku needs to be able to focus on what's important. And he's being distracted by so many things, right? And we're going to see that more throughout this episode. So what Korin has done is he's taken that away. Goku's hunger has been taken from him, and now he's not distracted by it anymore. He's balanced in that sense, right? Um, and so in that sense, it is a seed that is going to cultivate in the wisdom that Goku needs to get as a necessary stepping stone.
Right. I just don't necessarily I don't understand. Well, let me rephrase that. I don't necessarily see that it has to be a seed as much as it is a replenishment of the heroic spirit that's been expended over this course of time that he's like climbed the tower and all that stuff.
Hmm.
Um, because I think the re-nourishment and the consumption of soma that we'll get to in a minute, I'm not so sure that that needs that necessary seed.
No,
Like,
I don't. That's not what I'm saying. I'm
okay,
calling it symbolic in that sense, right?
mhm.
That and they would in Taoism they would refer to this as cultivation, right? Which sort of translated more to like refinement because the terms aren't exactly the same. But this is what the practitioners would do: is they would when they would give the pill that usually would induce an ego death, right? It had mushrooms in it. They would give the pill to their student, and in a sense, they would cultivation was like a big part of the way that they considered it to be part of nature, right? And so they were like, it's like planting seeds in people so that they can then cultivate their spirit, so to speak, or refine their spirit is more what they were trying to say.
Hmm.
So I think that the giving of it to him here is symbolic of that of what he's doing for him, right? And I think the fact that it takes his hunger from him helps him along that path.
I see. Okay. That's what I was getting confused
Hmm.
about. The giving of it is more of what you're talking about
Right.
because I think that actually would be analogous in the Lord of the Rings as well as the in the giving of the Lambus bread and the gifts is that kind of that same idea.
Right. And by using it in the proper way, let's say, you could refine yourself and you could be focused on more
Well, I
important
mean,
things,
let's
right?
say wh- just to take a microcosm from the Lord of the Rings, what do Merry and Pippin get but those daggers,
Hmm.
which allows them to actually refine themselves into fully integrated individuals capable of malice against those who deserve it, right? Because before that, they don't really fight, but they get those daggers, right?
Hmm. The refinement. I like refinement because
No,
that's
no,
what we're
that's good.
seeing.
That's good. I just was confused because I thought you were saying specifically the
No,
bean itself was refinement. I'm like, no, I don't know about that. But it's the giving of it. I see what you're talking about. Yeah.
right? The inducing of what you could
No, no,
use it
you're
for,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, there's just so much going on. Also in the scene, I like the 4 cabinets that he has, right? So whenever he's done, he shows the proper reverence for his meal, and then he puts the dishes into what looks like a cabinet that with infinite flowing water that's washing the dishes for him, right? Which is to say that it's sort of a Zen thing that he doesn't need to engage in doing these things because he's already gained the wisdom from uh, doing the thing. It's hard to say, it's hard to explain, but like this is a part of Zen Buddhism where the acting out of menial, I don't want to call them menial because they are important, but the acting out of everyday tasks and becoming very, very good at them in their simplicity refines you so that you can become focused. And it's sort of that cleanliness is godliness.
Well,
And so we see
it's
here
like
that Corrin doesn't need to do that,
it's the
right?
idea of clean up your room, right?
Right.
His room is cleaned automatically, right? The water automatically flows.
Hmm.
He has set himself such. He set his house in perfect order, and thus can criticize the world.
Yeah, it's like there are I can't remember. Oh, non-mythological series, but maybe slightly. The Dresden Files. It's like there's a point in the story when Dresden has these elves that come and start cleaning up after him, and they maintain his house for him. Right, his connection to his elves then keeps his house in perfect order, rather than him needing to do it constantly. Right, it's kind of like that.
Hmm. I've never read it. Interesting. Let's go ahead and continue. So then, Korin asks if the pouch with the 4-star ball is trash. And when Goku doesn't respond, due to being distracted, he throws it from the top of the tower. Goku rushes down the tower in disbelief, and Korin watches laughing to himself. Goku reaches the base as the sun is beginning to set, searching desperately for the ball. He finds it in a tree and ties it to his waist, scrambling straight back up the pole. He states that he's going to beat Korin's brains out. At the base of the tower, Upa gathers water for himself and catches a glimpse of Goku, but he can't believe that it was him because how fast he was. Back at the top, Goku tries to shout at Korin about importance of the ball, but he appears to be asleep. Doubting that he's really sleeping, Goku pries his eye open and sees a goldfish swimming inside of it. Korin laughs. So there's a lot to unpack here. So first of all, Korin throwing the ball off the tower because he asks if it's trash and Goku doesn't respond. And that's to say, like, the apathy towards that, if one is unconscious to their responsibility of carrying forth the ancestral spirit, then it will be cast aside. It'll be thrown down. You won't be able to maintain it unless you maintain a conscious effort to do so.
Hmm. There's also this element of it that it's like, what has Goku done? He's come up here and he keeps trying to get the water, but he doesn't pay any reverence. How does Korin eat? He Right, he shows reverence for the meal he receives. So Korin gives him something mystical that satiates him better than anything has ever satiated him. And Goku distracts himself with the closet full of water. And Korin asks him, he says, "Is this trash?" Goku doesn't respond. Korin is basically saying to him, okay, so this reverence for your ancestry, it's not the game you're trying to play here,
It's
right?
not even in your gaze.
Yeah, you're not paying attention to it, you're not
You're
using
not
it.
paying attention to it is a good way to say it, yeah.
And because Goku is not paying attention, Korin says, well, then I guess you're not going to need this, right? You're not going to need the 4-star ball because your mode of being here has nothing to do with your reverence for the ancestor. And it's all about securing this with your own will. And so he throws it because Goku then needs to start over and realize why he's climbing the tower, right? It's beautiful the way that he does it because then Goku has to appreciate it. And in appreciating it, strengthens his ability to breathe because he climbs the tower, right?
Well,
He works himself out more.
and by breathe, what Brock means is his ability to maintain his spirit. because when he came up the first time, his spirit was pretty maintained in the idea that he was here so he could revive Bora. But over time, after his personal needs came into being with the food, right? That's what kind of separated it and allowed his sight to be misguided or lost. And so then it was cast aside. And so yeah, he needs to start over because he needs to maintain the proper spirit the entire time that he is pursuing the sacred water, the super spirit water. One doesn't maintain a super spirit without maintaining a spirit.
Right, and Corrin is telling him by the action of doing so that, how should I say, you don't want, or what you want, you're not going to be able to get it without the Dragon Ball. He knows that the Dragon Ball is necessary for what Goku wants. So he's reminding him, hey, this is the impetus for you being here in the first place. Go back down to the bottom, stare into the Dragon Ball again, and refigure it out.
He didn't really have to stare into the
No,
Dragon Ball, but yeah,
but symbolically, right?
right. He has to focus on it. And actually, when he comes back to the top, he does like hold it up and he's
Hmm.
like,
This is really
this
important.
is really important. And he understands the importance of it. He has stared into it. He just lost sight of it for a moment. And so, losing sight of it, he is unconscious to it. And so, paralleled by Korin, he's also asleep whenever Goku gets back. He's unconscious to it. So it's kind of a parallel there between Goku's unconsciousness, right? And so that doubting he's really asleep, Goku pries his eyes open to see a goldfish swimming inside of it. Goldfish,
Hmm.
obviously for a cat being that sustenance idea, right? It's that same idea that Goku was exhibiting. It's kind of almost a mockery of it, like what's in your gaze but food, right? That has to go to the wayside.
Not only that, I really like the symbol of the goldfish in his eye because it's like, we've talked a lot about fish and what fish seem to symbolize right here, throughout the story. And I want to articulate it as the nourishment that can be gained from within the unconscious, right? So you
Mm-hmm.
see it like in the story of Jesus and like summoning the fish to the surface to fill the nets, right? Um, but when he looks in Corrin's eye, he sees a goldfish, right? And the gold is associated with the sun, right? It's associated with well, it's solar. And so I had mentioned before, whenever they would form those pills that are like senzu beans, they would use things like gold and mushrooms put together, right? It's very similar in that uh, symbology where you have the gold there, right? The nourishment from the unconscious that Korin has, right? That's in his vision is is gold, right? The gold in the unconscious, not just nourishment, but it's the greatest version of that nourishment.
Right, but and I like that analysis of it because it also layers to, let's say, someone who's not seeing it properly as something that's simply let's say substantial or food based, right?
Hmm.
Needs based. Um in physical based too, because the fish is a physical creature.
Right, and also a goldfish isn't typically what you would eat, right?
Right. Aren't they, are they poisonous?
I don't know if they're poisonous,
Maybe they're
but
just not good.
generally you don't hear of anyone wanting to eat
I
it.
mean
It's like
cats do
tropical
though.
fish.
Cats will.
Sure, cats will eat a fish,
Yeah, exactly.
but for Goku, let's say, right?
Sure, yeah, yeah. So let's go ahead and move on because the next thing we see is that Korin has moved to another place to nap, and Goku slowly approaches as if to steal the water from him while he is sleeping. He stops himself at the last moment, saying that he wants to get it without any unfair tricks. Korin observes that he's more honest than Master Roshi was. And of course, over the next day, Goku continues to attempt to get the water, being reminded again and again that he isn't reading Korin's breathing. The sun sets on Goku's second day at the tower, and meanwhile, Tao is meditating in his hotel room, contemplating the fact that Goku was able to live through his attack. He envisions the four-star ball protecting him and says that it doesn't matter since he only has one day left to live. So at the beginning here, do want to mention the integrity that Goku in embodies over that of Master Roshi, and I think it's because of the impetus to climbing the tower in the first place. Um, Goku is more than Master Roshi here, Not because Goku was just like, oh, he's a perfect character. It's because Goku decided to climb this tower because of his calling of responsibility that he gained by the interface between Malice and the paternal spirit that is Bora, and the call to adventure that is then summoned forth by the ancestral spirit to then set order and balance back to the existing establishment.
He's it's a nobler goal, you could say.
And so by having a nobler goal, it's easier for Goku to be more integral here and be more forthright with how he deals with Korin. And so he doesn't try to steal the water from Korin while he's asleep.
Now this is Goku's second night here, right? And once again, we see Goku's eyes wide open here at night. And he's learning essentially sort of his second lesson, which is more of the context of what the game is, right? He's learning that if he were to win the game by any unfair means, he's getting the intuition that he wouldn't have actually gotten what he came here for. He's just starting to get it, right? Because it's that contextualization of the game that he's playing. Um, this is the first inkling he has that just getting the water isn't good enough, right? Just physically getting the
Even though
super
he
spirit
still
water,
thinks that getting the water is the point.
right? But now he understands there's a higher point to it, right?
Right. And so he spends all day on the second day trying to get the tower, trying to get the water. And meanwhile, we do see Tao meditating in his room. Now, Tao here is he can't understand how the malice manifest in the Dodon Ray wasn't able to kill Goku.
hmm He, I like that he's meditating here first of all because we have an interplay with what he's doing.
Well, we also have the another aspect of the hyper discipline that we've talked about and
hmm
inhibited exhibited by Tao.
Yes, I do want to point that out because now that we've talked about the Senzu beans and what I think that they represent, which is very much how little you need and how little you realize how little you need. Think of Tao in the bath with his single egg, right? An egg is like a seed, it's like a bean, right? He's got his own version of it that he's doing ritualistically, right? He's taking in very little and he's living by minimal means, right? This isn't his home either, right? He's staying in a hotel without any luxury. I mean, it's a luxurious hotel, but he doesn't actually have any of his own things. He's just in a space, meditating and waiting for his gi to be rebuilt for him, right? And so his meditation here is very reflective of something that he has, a certain discipline that he has that Goku hasn't quite gotten yet.
Hmm.
Because he knows how little he actually needs, right? He has already reduced himself down, you could say, or refined himself in that sense.
Right, but he also doesn't he doesn't have an appreciation because of the way that he treats his resources
Mhm.
around him, right? He doesn't have that same appreciation as Goku because Goku is kind of stripped bare. He doesn't have like a lion tub and all that, right?
Right.
And so that part of um Tao's character, which exhibits his arrogance, is kind of foreshadowing what's gonna be his
Well,
downfall.
that's specifically why he's thinking here. Why couldn't my aim towards Goku kill him, right? And he's and it's I like that he's able to figure it out. Like he sees the 4-star ball, and he thinks back to what happened, and he creates a picture of it in his mind. But he doesn't quite get it because he says, "Oh, it doesn't matter," right? He doesn't realize the importance of that being able to protect the hero. So he's not. We see that he's refined himself, but he's not oriented in the right direction to get to that insight.
And so that disintegration allows him to be misled into thinking that it was just luck that had saved Goku instead
Right.
of that ancestral spirit that isn't instantiated within the 4-star ball. Again, though, it's hard for Tao to even understand that because of his lack of understanding of the context, which is another reason why him being bought by Commander Red is doomed to fail in the first place, is because he's not involved with that. It's bot malice, right? It's not contextual.
Right.
in the
It's
way that let's say if Red had the
mhm.
ability to exhibit this malice, then it would be something that he would know about.
It would, to someone who knew what it was, it would almost seem like a bad omen that
Mhm.
you tried and that's what happened, right? But really, Tao is just like, huh, well, he doesn't think about the fact that there's this thing that my Dodon ray couldn't break, right? He sees the 4-star ball in his mind, and he knows that he can't. It was a shield against the Dodon ray, that the Dodon ray didn't break it, but he doesn't understand the context as to why that could even be.
Right. And that's because he hasn't ever encountered something that can go against the spirit of malice that he is, let's say, representative of.